Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we are talking about Backrooms, the new A24 sci-fi horror film directed by Kane Parsons, also known as Kane Pixels, who went from making scary YouTube videos in his bedroom to directing 2 Academy Award nominees in what might be the most Gen Z horror movie ever made, and I mean that as both a compliment and a threat. This movie is based on the internet phenomenon The Backrooms, which started as a creepy image online and evolved into a giant collaborative horror myth about accidentally transporting into an endless maze of fluorescent yellow office spaces. The film follows Clark, a furniture store owner who discovers an endless dimension of rooms accessed through the store's basement. Now, before I get into this review, no spoilers for the first half, minor spoilers later. Overall, I really like this movie. I didn't head over heels love it. I don't think it reinvented cinema, but I do think it's one of the most creative horror movies released in the last few years, because even when it doesn't work, it fails in fascinating ways. And honestly, I'll take a fascinating creation over another possessed child with trauma movie any day. The biggest strength of Backrooms is easily the atmosphere. Kane Parsons understands space better than most professional horror directors. That sounds weird to say, but seriously, the geometry in this movie feels wrong. The hallways are too long, the rooms feel too empty, the dark corners feel dangerous, and the movie constantly creates this feeling that reality itself is buffering. There are shots in this movie that genuinely feel like found footage from another dimension, which is impressive considering most modern horror movies look like expensive Netflix commercials. The sound design is incredible too. Every fluorescent light buzz sounds ominous. The ambient noise alone could probably qualify as psychological warfare, and this movie understands something modern horror often forgets. Empty space is scary. Not everything needs a demon sprinting at the camera screaming. Sometimes a hallway is enough. Sometimes carpet with a weird pattern is enough. Sometimes hearing a noise 3 rooms away is enough. The movie weaponizes anticipation. You spend most of the runtime waiting for something horrible to happen, and occasionally, the movie realizes the anticipation itself is scarier than the payoff. That's genius filmmaking. But here's where things get complicated. Backrooms is trying to adapt a concept that was scary specifically because it barely had a story. The original internet lore worked because it felt mysterious. You saw images and videos, you filled in the blanks. The horror existed in your imagination. This movie has to turn that into an actual narrative with characters and themes and emotional arcs, which is hard, because once you start explaining the backrooms become less scary. That's kind of the movie's central paradox. The more lore it introduces, the less uncanny everything feels. At a certain point, the movie starts feeling less like existential horror and more like, hey guys, welcome back to Backrooms Explained, episode 47. There are moments where characters are discussing the mechanics of this dimension, and I'm sitting there thinking, just please stop talking. The hallways and wallpapers were carrying their weight. And that's the balancing act that this movie never fully solves. How do you make a feature length film out of something that was fundamentally scary because it was so minimal? To the movie's credit, it usually pulls back before completely ruining the mystery, but there are definitely scenes where you can feel the studio version of the movie fighting the analog horror version of the movie. It's like 2 different films trapped in the same maze. Chiwetel Ejiofor is doing real acting in a movie where half the runtime is walking around and staring at beige walls. Mad respect. He gives the movie emotional grounding. Without him, this probably would have collapsed into pure experimental atmosphere. My favorite performance in the film came from Renata Reinsve, who plays Clark's therapist Mary. Renata plays confusion and fear incredibly well, and she did great work with her character. Everyone in this movie gives strong performances all around. They all look like they haven't slept in days, which feels accurate. Mark Duplass shows up with the exact energy of a man who definitely knows too much. The second he appears, you instantly go, what does he know? He has one of those faces where he could either help you escape, or explain why human suffering is necessary for science. There's no middle ground. The performances overall are strong, but the problem isn't the acting. The problem is that the movie's best scenes barely need characters at all. The backrooms themselves are the star, and whenever the movie cuts away from that eerie isolation into plot progression, the tension sometimes deflates. Now, visually, this thing is insane, especially when you remember Kane Parsons is 20 years old. At 20 years old, I was struggling to fold fitted sheets correctly. Meanwhile, this guy is directing an A24 horror movie. I swear, some people have different software installed. The visual language here feels heavily inspired by found footage, old VHS recordings, internet horror, and liminal photography. All of that is masterfully executed by the cinematography. That was often the film's biggest star. You're not watching characters move through sets, you're watching people navigate impossible architecture. That distinction matters. A lot of horror movies create scary locations. Backrooms creates spatial dread. The environments feel hostile. And Kane Parsons clearly understands how younger, internet naive audiences process horror imagery. This movie feels designed by someone who grew up online, not in a cynical corporate way, in a real way. It understands the modern fear of unreality, the fear that the world itself has become artificial. That's why the movie works when it works, not because of monsters, because it taps into dissociation. My biggest issue with Backrooms is the pacing. The movie alternates between, "this is the creepiest thing I've ever seen," and, "okay, we get it." Atmospheric horror is difficult because atmosphere alone can't sustain momentum forever. There are stretches where the movie intentionally slows down to immerse you. Sometimes it's hypnotic. Other times it feels like the cinematic equivalent of being stuck in IKEA or RC Willie. And I know some people are going to absolutely love that. Some people are going to call this a masterpiece. Other people are going to say nothing happened. And both reactions make sense. This is one of those movies where your tolerance for ambiguity determines your entire experience. If you love slow burn surreal horror, you'll probably eat this up. If you need constant action, this movie is going to feel like being trapped in a haunted office building during a fire drill. Overall, I think Backrooms is a really impressive debut feature. Sure, it has flaws and is uneven at times, and is occasionally self-indulgent, but at the same time, it's undeniably original, and originality matters, especially in modern horror where every third movie is either a legacy sequel, a possession movie, or grief metaphor creature feature number 78. Backrooms at least feels like it came from a real creative voice. Seeing a YouTube horror creator make the jump to theatrical filmmaking this successfully is really exciting. This movie feels like proof that internet horror has officially entered mainstream cinema, for better and worse, because now the terrifying liminal spaces from your YouTube recommendations have A24 production budgets, which means nowhere is safe anymore. My rating? 8 out of 10. Unsettling and strongly creative. All in all, I'd much rather watch a weird, ambitious movie like this than another generic horror sequel, and if Kane Parsons keeps improving, he could easily become one of the top directors working right now. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Backrooms. Let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments. Did it terrify you? Bore you? Or are you now permanently uncomfortable in empty office buildings? If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. I'll see you guys in the next one.